And they led him to Annas first, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, which was the high priest that same year. Now Caiaphas was he which gave counsel to the Jews that it was necessary that one man should die for the people. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and then went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door outside, and then went out that other disciple, which was known unto the high priest, and spoke unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. And then said the little girl that kept the door unto Peter, Are not you also one of this man's disciples? And he said, I am not. And the servants and the officers stood there, who made a fire of coals, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. And Peter stood with them, and warmed himself. And the high priest then asked Jesus of his disciples and of his doctrine. And Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, where the Jews always resort, and in secret have I said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask them which heard me what I have said to them. Behold, they know what I said. And when he had thus spoken, one of the officers which stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, Do you answer the high priest so? And Jesus answered him, If I've spoken evil, testify of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Now Annas had sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. And Simon Peter stood there and warmed himself. And they said therefore unto him, Are you not also one of this man's disciples? And he denied, and said, I am not. And one of the servants of the high priest, being family whose ear Peter cut off, said, Did I not see you with him in the garden? Peter then denied again, and immediately the rooster crowed. And then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the hall of judgment. And it was early, and they themselves did not go into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they should eat the Passover. Pilate then went out into them and said, What accusation do you bring against this man? And they answered and said to him, If he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him unto you. And then said Pilate unto them, You take him and judge him according to your law. The Jews therefore said to him, It's not lawful for us to put any man to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying what death he should die. And then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again, and called Jesus, and said to him, Are you the King of the Jews? And Jesus answered him, Do you say this thing of yourself, or did others tell it to you? And Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you unto me. What have you done? And Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from here. Pilate therefore said unto him, Are you a king then? Jesus answered, You say that I am a king, and for this cause was I born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, What is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews, and said to them, I find in him no fault at all. But you have a custom that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? And they cried out, all again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. And then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it upon his head. And they put on him a purple robe and said, "Hail, hail, King of the Jews." And they struck him with their hands. And Pilate therefore went out again and said unto them, "Behold, I bring him forth to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him." And then came Jesus forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said unto them, "Look on the man." And when the chief priest therefore and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And Pilate said unto him, "You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again into the judgment hall, and said unto Jesus, "From where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. And then said Pilate unto him, "Do you not speak unto me? Do you not know that I have power to crucify you, and I have power to release you?" Jesus answered, "You could have no power at all against me, except it were given to you from above. Therefore he that delivered me unto you has the greater sin." And from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, "If you let this man go, you're not Caesar's friend. Whosoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." And when Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth and sat down in the judgment seat, in the place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation of the Passover. And about the 6th hour, he said unto the Jews, "Look on your king." But they cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" And Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" Then the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." And then he delivered him unto them to be crucified. And they took Jesus and led him away. And he, carrying his cross, went forth to the place called the place of a skull, which is in Hebrew, Golgotha. And where they crucified him, and 2 others with him, on either side one, and Jesus in the middle. And Pilate wrote a title and put it on a cross. And the writing was, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." And this title read many of the Jews, for the place where Jesus was crucified was nigh unto the city. And it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. And then said the chief priest to the Jews, to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am the King of the Jews." And Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to every soldier a part, and also his coat. Now the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout. Then they said among themselves, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be, that the scripture might be fulfilled, which says, They divided my raiment among them, and for my clothing they did cast lots." And these things therefore the soldiers did. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother, and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Cleophas, and Mary Magdalene. Now Jesus, when he saw his mother and the disciple standing by whom he loved, he said to his mother, "Look on your son." And then he said to the disciple, "Look on your mother." And from that hour, that disciple took him into his own home. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scriptures might be fulfilled, said, "I thirst." Now there was set a vessel full of vinegar, and they filled a sponge full of vinegar, and put it upon hyssop, and put it to his mouth. And Jesus therefore, when he received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up the spirit. Now the Jews therefore, because it was the preparation that the body should not remain upon the cross on the Sabbath day, because the Sabbath day was a high day, begged Pilate that the legs might be broken, and that they might be taken away. And then came the soldiers, and they broke the legs of the first and of the other, which were crucified with him. And when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was dead already, and they broke not his legs. But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith there came out blood and water. And he that saw it bare record, and his record is true, and he knows that he says true, that you might believe. For these things were done, that the scripture should be fulfilled. A bone of his shall not be broken. And again another scripture, and they shall look on him whom they pierced. And after this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, for fear of the Jews, begged Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate allowed him. And he came therefore and took the body of Jesus. And there was also Nicodemus, which first came to Jesus at night, and brought him a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100-pound weight. Then they took the body of Jesus and wound it in linen clothes, with the spices, as the manner of Jews is to bury. Now the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, wherein was never a man laid. And there they laid Jesus, because the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nigh at hand.